China has been a close partner of North Korea. China used to provide energy and food to Pyongyang, and they still do. Therefore, China has the leverage to persuade and influence North Korean leaders that they should stop nuclear proliferation and make a right choice about the future of North Korea, like Vietnamese have done. Under communism, Vietnamese economy has made a tremendous economic growth during the last 10 to 20 relationships. So certainly Chinese view on North Korea has changed. Although strategically, still China wants to exercise its influence on North Korean side. So for that reason, we need to talk with China on a strategic level, have a strategic dialogue to persuade North Korea to make a right choice and for two Koreas to move towards eventual unification. So we need to deal with China carefully and to maintain good communication with Beijing so that we can move forward. Now the issue currently is, one is economic, one is military. Economic one is AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which China has suggested. The Chinese rationale is that, we need to have a new infrastructure, a financial supporting bank so that Asian countries can join together and then develop the area of emerging countries, developing countries in Asia. And they invited Korea to join. Now, from Korean viewpoint, we have two aspects to consider. One is that, do we need to create a new bank in Asia in addition to the existing one? The existing one is Asia Development Bank and also World Bank. And the ADB and the World Bank, the United States and Japan are the leading stakeholders. And two is that what will happen if Korea joins the AIIB? What will happen to our relationship with the United States? Because Korea and the United States are close alliance, close allies. We have nothing to hide from each other. We can have a very frank discussion on any important issues for decision. Now, in the meantime,
Jin, I want to open up for questions, and perhaps the balance of yours will pick up with it, but if I could hold you there, and then let's open up for questions and see where we're at that time. Yes, sir.
I have a question for...
Here we have a mic.
Hello? Yeah, my name is Ivan Stork. I'm originally from Germany, and I have a question for Dr. Park and for Dr. Osman afterwards. Regarding the unification, Germany went to 50-some years separated from the East and the West. What progress is being done from the people themselves, and hopefully the political side from the South? I assume is there, the North is probably questionable. What is being done to get people together that automatically brings then the economy run together? Are there steps permanent steps being in place to do it? And the other question I have for Dr. Rossmann is, I have to take at my notes on this one. Regarding Ukraine, and you said the similarity there. You think that maybe has something to do when you go back in history and you see Vice Russia, Ukraine was part of this one, supported Hitler Germany at this time against Russia. You think that it's really possible that there's something of retaliation, that that's why it's the reason they're going more into take Ukraine into their fist? Thank you very much.
Okay, gentlemen, we've got about 20 minutes left, so if you could hold your answers as short as you can so we get more participants.
yeah, I'd like to be very brief. Between Germany and Korea, we are different. German unification and Korean unification, if it happens, might be a kind of different course of event. Because in the case of Germany, the two Germanys didn't fight war against each other. And East Germany didn't develop nuclear weapons. And the Soviet Union in terms of its relationship with former East Germany between Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Honecker is now different from China and North Korea. North Korea is developing nuclear weapons, still close to China, despite the recent uncomfortable relationship. And also, we fought a war against each other between two Koreas. So that's why the Cold War legacy still remains on the Korean Peninsula. So if the unification happens on the Korean Peninsula, it would not be something like the crumbling down of the Berlin Wall and the integration of two Germanys. So the ideal solution to me is that we move towards more peaceful and gradual integration between two sides, especially on the economic and cultural level, before we talk about political and military unification, which is more difficult, somehow to bring the gap between the two communities, South Korea and North Korea, and get them closer together. That's the reason why current president of Korea, Madame Park Geun-hye, visited the city of Dresden in former East Germany, and then she gave a speech and emphasized 3 points. One, we want to provide humanitarian assistance to North Korea because people are suffering from the economic poverty. Two, we want to invest into North Korea for infrastructure and the people's livelihood, because in the eventual case of unification, we want to minimize the unification cost by elevating the North Korean economic level. Three, we need to bring two countries closer in terms of our language, in terms of our culture, in terms of our social customs, to assimilate two societies, so that we might find it easier to unify the two Koreas. So far, North Korea has rejected this approach. They think that, oh, this is a kind of an absorption strategy of the South to swallow North Korea. That's not the case, but certainly German unification, although the context of unification is different from Korea, certainly we have learned lessons from German.
Okay, Gil, on Ukraine.
Yes, on Ukraine, I think you've illustrated my overall point that issues are being framed in deep historical context. And so, Russia is saying, in much of its propaganda right now, that it's fascists who are taking over in Ukraine, making the link with the collaborators of Germany during the war years, for which Ukrainians were heavily punished after the war, and many of them reacted because the Soviet Union had been so horrible to Ukraine in the 1930s with a forced famine killing many millions. So I think that's the point they're using, but I don't think that's a real issue. And I mean, there may be some tiny minority, but I don't think that's the case. And actually, that has a parallel with what China is doing with Japan, saying, okay, Japan is going back to the militarism of the 1930s and 40s. It's anything Japan does to try to defend itself is really another example of what Japan was like in history, and therefore you get an effort to use a pretext in order to build the kind of regional leadership that you actually want by demonizing your opponents.
Next question. Do any students have any questions? I want to defer to them first. Now we'll go to, so who's got the next question? I've got several questions here. Yes, Jules?
When there are discussions of international relations and disagreements, I think there's a kind of natural tendency to say to oneself or to each other, if only we could speak the same language, speak in the same terms. I'd like to offer just for consideration, maybe there's some advantage to speaking different languages. The problem with speaking the same language is if everybody is after the same kinds of goals, you get into zero-sum games where one party's gain is another's objective loss. But if different parties are seeking different goals, one party seeking wealth, another prestige, for example, then it's possible to come to to compromises where everybody leaves the table satisfied that they've gotten the better part of the deal. Now, how does this plug into what you're saying? Some of what I get from the discussion is there may be at least 3 significant players in the world, arguably the United States, China, and Russia, each of which thinks it's the center of the world. And then there are some other countries about that are important, like Japan or Korea or India, who might be thinking, well, no, you're not. And the mix is complicated. And that's as far as I've gotten to formulating a coherent question.
I think you're right to get us into the language and the perceptions, but I don't think that the goals are sufficiently different where we can say there's a nice division of labor. Actually, I think U.S. policy has tried to figure out ways with the reset to Russia, how we can satisfy Russia's goals and our own goals and not have this conflict. And Europe has done a lot of that too. Or China's goals versus other countries in the region. And yet there's so much emphasis on this issue of prestige, as you indicated, of pride, of hierarchy, and it has so many elements to it. There's so many symbols present that we enter zero-sum games very easily. And no one has been able to figure out a way of how to shift these zero-sum games. Economically, everybody gains, right? Globalization, TPP, China joins TPP, Russia, great exports, everybody gains, but that hasn't had much effect. The more economic ties have improved, the worse the distrust has grown. So we don't have a way of overcoming that. We also talked about regionalism, multilateralism, getting together in organizations and talking, even history textbooks, where we all can find common ground. But it turns out these symbols that each side is bringing up have torn their understanding further apart, and we're going downhill rather than improving. We're still trying to find these common goals, and we're hoping that new solutions are there. And I know that there are many ideas on the table this year when we have this crucial 70th anniversary and 50th anniversary for finding some new notion of history that can bridge the gaps. But I think the overall trend is in another direction.
Any other questions?
Well, let me make one point. I think that this multilateral diplomacy and regional dialogue will continue to have importance, although we cannot find an immediate answer to all the problems that we have. Certainly dialogue is better than non-dialogue, and dialogue is better than confrontation. In the case of Korea, China, and Japan, as I mentioned, we have fought with many difficult issues, historical issue, territorial issue. When we talk with Japanese, between Korea and Japan, we talk about these issues at first, and then it's very difficult to make progress because it's like a parallel dialogue. But when we invite China to Korea recently, as we have done by hosting a 3-country foreign ministers meeting, Korea's role was to moderate between China and Japan because they were so different in their perception. So I thought to myself that this is the area where Korea can play this role as a coordinator of different interests and to try to find a common ground where we can peacefully coexist with each other and resolve this Asian paradox. As Gil has mentioned, more economic partnership, but still more political conflicts. I think we should get out of this vicious circle and then try to find some sort of a regional common community.
Roxanne, let me pull you into this. Gil just said that the more economic ties that people have seemingly doesn't bring people closer together politically. And I saw you react? I didn't know if that was a shriek or a wince or you're just nonplussed. Do you want to follow up on that?
Well, I'm coming from Eastern European country with a tradition
Could you put the mic closer, yes?
with a tradition in Romania tradition, I guess, in the last 25 years of having the benefit of European integration into the European Union. I think that can be an example that stands apart from that. The European Union is probably the exception in this case, that is focused on both economic ties and political ties, and has done so, I would say, to the benefit of all. On the one hand, to the benefit of Western European countries that were already members of the European Union, where they could benefit economically from a larger market to sell to, but also by imposing certain political and economic standards on the joining countries, benefit further from a more standardized common market and political ties that way. I wonder if it's easier to do it in Europe because of greater historical linkages there and less recent disagreement, but that would be an interesting example for Asia as well, and Dr. Park pointed to that, to Germany.
Let's see if anybody else has a question. All right. Oh, yes, sir. Thank you.
I think you're about to talk about it when you're talking about the World Bank, and I'm talking about the bully on the block. Now, do you think, I just want to know if you think the United States is moving too slowly to come in and help, I hate to say protect, but protect Japan, Korea, even Vietnam, and by the bullying effects by China? Because you know China's moving into different areas, trying to claim different lands, trying to claim different situations. Naturally, they're doing it in Africa and different places like that, by inserting money and aid and stuff like that. But is the United States moving quick enough to avert China taking over maybe some territories or some other bullying effects that you probably, I wouldn't assume you've seen?
A problem for the U.S. moving quickly versus China in the South China Sea and the East China Sea is China staying away from crossing red lines. They're doing things slowly. And the bigger problem, though, is that nobody wants the U.S. to act more quickly. And most of the countries are saying to the U.S., figure out a solution that allows us to have very good ties with China. And so, for instance, the U.S. took a strong pro-Japan stand, which we've taken in various ways, but we went even further. South Korea would be nervous, I think. And if we, in Southeast Asia, stuck strongly with the Philippines, which has the most animosity towards China right now, no other country in the 10-country ASEAN group would be pleased with the confrontational approach. So I happen to think that the rebalance step by step and Obama's important trip to Asia in April of last year, in which he affirmed U.S. support for Japan's administrative control of the Senkaku Island, Yaoyu Island right now, was just about the right degree of support. But this issue is quickly evolving, and the U.S. may have to show further support at some other occasion.
China announced that it wanted to block the so-called global commons, the shipping lanes, in the particular area of the world. And the U.S. and Japan came up with a joint concept for access and maneuver in the global commons area. So it appears to be almost a checkmate situation. China moves and the U.S. tries to move with Korea or Japan. All right, we've got a few more minutes. You had a question over here? I want to make sure everybody who has a question